pipeline for that. So I think what we're going to do today is we're going to start off with some questions. I think our panelists will react to those and respond. We are going to, this is a very large subject area, as you all know, so we're going to, keep it fairly, try to get into specific functional areas and topical areas, and also keeping in the back of our minds that the focus of this is to also consider the small and mid-sized business in our responses. So there's a lot of unique aspects for the small and mid-sized business. Not only are they limited often in resources and expertise, but also headcount, financial resources can be limited. So we're going to consider that in our recommendations and responses if we can. All right. So with that, I think let's get things going. I think, Orly, thanks for the introductions. My name is Gregg Laroche. I head up product management at PreVeil, and happy to be moderating this panel. And I'm going to start off with my first question, which I think is going to go out to all the panelists. But we'll start with Stacy first. And let's say, from the C3PAO perspective, you folks are engaging with a lot of companies in the space and in the pipeline now, and they're trying to sort out, what to do and how to get there. What are some of the trends or best practices that you are seeing in your practice emerging with regards to readiness and specific approaches under the CMMC guideline?
Hi, Greg. Thank you. So some of those that we're seeing are prepping, right? We're seeing a lot of prep work. We've seen that for over a year now. Some of the bigger companies are in a different area, right? They can afford to get to prep a lot better, right? Small business, medium businesses are reaching out for assistance from not only C3PAOs, RPOs, and basically cyber folks that really know NIST 800-171, and they really know what an assessment looks like and what these small businesses have to do. So, kind of getting them from ML1 to 2 to 3, it's baby steps. And so we're trying to help them with some of the harder questions. We've actually been helping quite a few folks along the way, just helping them, right? Not big contracts for these guys, just trying to help them. And I think that's what we've been doing, and some of our partners have been doing the same. But as long as they can just take the baby steps and get through the 800-171 with 110 controls, then they'll be able to hit the 130 practices for ML3. But it takes time, and it takes patience, and it takes a lot of input from the top down, right? Yeah.
Great, thanks. Let's go to Robert next. So same question for you. Best practices, trends, where are folks at right now?
Well, so for most of the folks that have signed up with us, it varies on the company. Some of them don't have a enclave even designed yet. Some of them don't have their SSP done yet. So it goes from that gamut all the way up to those that feel they are ready to go for a CMMC ML3 certification right out the gate. But we have doing as an RPO with Redspin as well, a lot of consulting to assist organizations in getting those things done, identifying where you're going to contain your CUI, developing your SSP, your policies, your procedures, because you're going to need all those as you go through the assessment.
Okay, Karen, over to you.
Yeah, I'll echo what Robert said. I think one of the biggest challenges for a lot of folks trying to get compliant is to understand the concept of a boundary. Another common stumbling block is to understand where their CUI lives. For some older organizations, they may have it sprinkled out all throughout their organization on different file servers or SharePoint sites. So, just understanding where their CUI is a big challenge for some of our organizations. And then the whole concept, as Greg mentioned, is Robert mentioned, is the concept of the boundary, and the guidance put forth from the CMMC AB is basically anything that is connected to something that touches your CUI is in the boundary. So You have to have sufficient logical separation for any of that CUI information. So I think, a lot of organizations need to focus on finding their CUI and putting it in their boundary. That's been a bit of a challenge for folks.
That makes a lot of sense. And it seems to be a consistent theme from all our panelists. You guys pretty much relating that folks are sorting this out, right? They're working towards a goal, and there's some fundamental building blocks and there's steps along the way to get there. And that seems clear. So keep going on that theme, Karen, although from the perspective of where are the misconceptions or what areas are causing confusion as folks are now trying to take these first steps? Like, not only where is my CUI, but what other areas are you seeing as causing confusion on the journey?
I think for some of the folks who may not have been, heavily involved in any 800-171 initiatives, there's a struggle to understand the interpretation of the control requirements. And I think that that's something where, this may be the first time some of these folks have heard of FIPS. They don't know what that means. They don't know where they would need to deploy it. They don't even know what a FIPS module is, so I think that for some folks, just the federal terminology and the requirements that we all take for granted are new to a lot of these folks. So, I think I'm hoping that as the framework evolves and the program matures, there'll be more guidance available to folks as to what, when do you need to use FIPS compliant encryption, when do you not? But, I think that some of the interpretation of the technical controls is going to be a stumbling block for folks. And I think that that's where, bringing in, if you're not really solid with respect to understanding and interpreting federal requirements, it's really a good idea to bring in a consultant who can help you do that interpretation.
Great. So, Stacy, same question for you. Where are you seeing folks getting stuck or confused? In addition, certainly it makes sense that the actual requirements are one of those areas, but what else are we seeing out there?
Yeah, Karen hit it right on the nose, right? It's going from the interpretation of the NIST 800-171 verbiage. So the ML3 guide does a pretty good job, but it doesn't take you all the way to the end zone, right? So I think that's where it can help with your end-to-end encryption for your remote workforce, right? Via VPN, your multi-factor authentication, helping them with that, helping them with all of the ins and outs of the access control practice, the SC practice, some of the bigger ones, right? Knowing your boundary, where you're transmitting, storing, processing that CUI data. And that's what we're seeing. That's where we're helping these folks, literally going from kind of gumbly wumbly language to English language of this is what that means, and then showing them a little bit more detailed examples. Like if you have it in this implementation, or if this is the software, or this is the domain you're using, this is how it would be implemented for the practice to be met. Yep.
Makes sense. Robert, if you could add some color for us around, all of this is adding up to a very cohesive story in my mind. What about, where are folks at in terms of their institutional or internal knowledge in these areas? Are people starting at ground zero, or are people halfway there from their previous efforts on 171? Where do you see people kind of on the spectrum of understanding how to resolve these areas of confusion and how to bring clarity against the requirements?
Yeah, again, it depends on the organization. Those that, as the other panelists have said, that have been, nested in NIST 800-171 are really not going to have any issues. Most folks they understand CMMC. They've been out to the AB website. They've looked at the basic main concept of CMMC, so they understand it. It's just a little bit of a struggle with some of the things they don't know. And to be honest, we don't know either. One is derived CUI. So if you have an organization that develops a part, for example, that part is in the CUI enclave because it belongs to a bigger piece of system for the DoD, but this organization also uses it as a regular part in their civilian side of their processes. So where does this particular part live? Does it live in the CUI area? Can it live in the other areas? So there's a lot of confusion that we're still waiting on clarity with. I think that's contributing to a lot of frustration. But most of the organizations that we've seen so far are pretty well prepared. They've done their homework. They've been doing this, as Stacy said, started years ago, to start preparing, and even brought in consultants to assist. And that is also a big key.
All right, well, let's stick with that for a moment, because now a couple of you brought up, Karen as well, the concept of consulting. So we know that, in the mid-market, a lot of these companies are going to have resource limitations. So I'd be interested to see, like, how do you see consulting playing a role in that CMMC journey for the company that maybe doesn't have big resources to lay down on consulting? Do you have advice or experience with those types of customers?
Well, sorry, ladies, I'll jump in first. But since Redspin, we're a small company, and we ourselves invested in a consultant, even though that's what we do. We're a cybersecurity company, but we even brought in a consultant to help us to ensure that the I's were dotted and the T's were crossed in order to get past the DIBCAC, right, which was required to become a C3PAO. So how does that work for a small organization? Well, a lot of the C3PAOs are basing the consulting, RPOs are basing the consulting on bucket hours. So if you need, 50 hours of work to assist you in establishing where that enclave is going to be, what are those borders? What's the documentation look like? It ranges anywhere from, 5,000 up all the way up. So it just depends on how much help you need. The best bet and my recommendation is to get as much done as you can yourself, and then bring the consultants in, and then they can come right on the top of what you've already accomplished and identify gaps that you still have to fill.
Great. Karen, looks like you have something to add to that. Please do.
Yeah, I would say, organizations know the importance of their becoming accredited. If you're a small organization and you have a very large contract that requires CMMC compliance, and you're worried, I think that the best money you could spend if money is tight at that point is to do a gap analysis with a consultant who's familiar with the framework and the technology and federal requirements as well. I think you want to be careful to pick a vendor. I think there's folks in the CMMI space who are probably fine at a lot of these requirements, but may not understand, for example, the FIPS we just discussed. So I think the best money, if you know you need to get compliant, would be to hire a competent vendor in the space and do a gap analysis, and then walk out of that with a series of recommendations and actions that you need to take to become compliant. And to do it, at that point, you may be able to do it all yourself, or you may be able to determine at that point you need to bring in a consultant, or you need to make some additional purchases, or you need to maybe migrate to a different CUI enclave.
Right. Yeah, Stacy, if I may, can I get a comment about consulting, but in the framework of how do I know I'm ready, right, as a smaller mid-sized business on this journey? I know Robert said a lot of folks have done their homework and they're in good shape. I got to imagine there are some that are not. And so what does that look like from a standpoint of when should I get a consultant involved, and when am I ready?
Well, and what I say is, if you're not a DoD contractor now, and if you don't understand NIST 800-171, if you do not have an SSP, if you do not have your procedures, plans, and policies documented, get help. Because what we did, we flipped our SSP from the security controls in NIST to the practices in CMMC, so they lined up for the DIBCAC assessors. And we had 52 documents, 17 plans that expounded on our SSP, right? 17 plans, 17 policies, 17 procedures, step by step. And that's a lot of work. So if you don't have that, and if you have an SSP, you're not ready. You really have to have all that documentation, the processes and the maturity, the repeatable processes, so that when you're going through this, you're actually using your CMMC as you go through the assessment. When we went through our assessment with the DIBCAC this past summer, sounds so weird to say, this past summer, it's been so long, we actually were in the process of going through our review, and we had to make a couple updates to documentation. We went through our CM process, and they got that. They said, great, you went through your CM process to make a change. So they were actually watching us as they were reviewing us. So that's what you want to make sure you have all those. And when you start going through the documentation, right, then you're like, oh my gosh, wow. So that's a big thing, because once you pass your documentation review, then you go to the big show, right, where you're actually doing the interviews from everyone in the company is involved. So that's what I would say. Once you actually look at those, you know, the 998, the 997, the 999s, and really get into that, then you'll understand what you have to do. But if you are not a DoD contractor now and you're not sure about 800-171, you need a pre-assessment. If you're a contractor and you feel really good, go for it, maybe, or get a gap. Yeah.
If I can also jump on and highlight a little bit of what Stacy just said, because she touched on it, and that was stakeholders within the organization. Because once all the documentation is done, the stakeholders are coming to the interview, and I'm talking your HR department, I'm talking your finance department, folks outside of IT that need to understand the processes and procedures, because they're going to be asked. And if they don't, then your organization is not practicing those processes and procedures. So that's important as well.
Yeah, I would highly recommend prior to the audit, what we're doing for each of the controls is we're indicating who's responsible for the implementation, and they're going to be aware of what we've said we do before we actually go into the audit. You know, I think that, you know, you don't want to initiate your own finding by sending somebody in who hasn't actually familiarized themselves with what your policies are. So it's really critical. I believe the DIBCAC can ask you know, what we learned in the training as a provisional assessor is that anyone who implemented the controls should expect to be interviewed. So those folks need to know how you're complying. You know, what is the method that you're using to get there? How is it implemented? And be able to explain that to your auditors.
Yeah, this is a really great topic that you guys have covered here. I want to stay with this a little bit, because I'm going to presume that our audience is really curious about what is the audit actually like what's going to happen to us, like what can we expect when the assessors are in and the interviews are happening and the documentation's, you know, being reviewed or been reviewed. Can you folks take turns commenting on process? Like what do you think it's going to look like?
So are you asking what the DIBCAC assessment looked like, or what we are going to do in our when we
I think it's more the second one. I think it's more the second one, because a lot of our folks out here aren't C3PAO pipeline companies, and they're not going to see DIBCAC. So
yeah, I'm telling you one thing. I will never forget how I felt, or all my people felt. So we take that with us. We know you're nervous. We know it's stressful. We know you worked hard. And we are there with you. It's a team effort, right? But from our perspective, we have a pretty clear picture of how we're going to do it. We are going to do it the way the DIBCAC did, right? It's a formal assessment methodology. We were all trained the same way. You're going to go through that okay, let me back up. So first, you're going to have your assessment template, right? You're going to have your assessment form, go back and forth. You get the stakeholders, the boundary, you get all the information, the locations, the hardware, the software. You go back and forth with the assessment plan until you figure out exactly what your plan is going forward. Then once you get past that step, you actually go into the documentation review. Once you pass the documentation review and all of your documentation lines up, right? Your policies, plans, and procedures line up. Your policies don't say, we let everyone in the building with no badge, you know, it says the right thing, right? And your policies say one thing and your procedures follow those policies, right? And then once you pass that stage, then you get your quote virtual on-site or real on-site. We had a 4-hour on-site for the physical controls and some other controls, and we'll try to do that too. As soon as Delta COVID or whatever's happening now goes away, then we'll do the on-site. But right now it's virtual, and we'll actually go through every single one of the practices to make sure they're implemented correctly. That means talking to your, like Robert said, talking to your FSO, your HR, your president, your VP about your budget, making sure you have the budget for that there. Every single one. And it took us 5 days to go through this, about 8 to 4 each day. And then we finished out with the closeout. And then it took a couple weeks or more for us to get authorized because it's huge, right? There's a lot of people involved. And that's kind of how our process goes. But we're always in contact back and forth, making sure that everyone's, on board and clearly communicating the whole time. So you don't have those gaps like what's happening, because that's the worst part, right? So that's how we do it.
I would add that, the assessment, the audit needs to consist of 3 different methods: examine, interview, and test. And so,
oh, sure, yeah.
Yes, typically what we will do is, I think what we can expect, consistently throughout the industry is that they'll examine your documentation to figure out what you say you're doing, and then they'll interview with the folks that you say are doing it, and then they'll most likely ask for an artifact demonstrating that they are indeed doing it. So 2 of those 3 need to be conducted, at least 2 of them need to be conducted for each of the controls and scope. So you need to look at it from that perspective. Even if you have a great story in your documentation and your folks are saying the right thing, if your auditor is going to say, can you show me a ticket demonstrating that occurred, you may not pass that control. So you need to think about it from the perspective of all 3 of those. You don't know what your auditor is going to pick, which of the 2. So you need to be prepared to answer all 3 of those requirements.
And I think the other thing, and Stacy kind of hit on it, is we've been on this end of it, right? So as our provisional assessors are coming out to do the certification, I think it's important for the OSCs and all the listeners that are joining this summit to understand is that, we would really love to come in and say, what does your access controls look like? Your policy may be missing a little bit of this. However, we cannot do that because we're held to a tight, kind of stringent rule, if you will, with the CMMC as the assessors. But that's not to say that we're not going to come in and be inhuman. We're not coming in with a bat and cracking the table and pointing fingers and laughing at folks. We've been on your side of the table, so we understand. So there's a human aspect to it that's going to come in. And what really sucks about it is you have to be just straightforward. Either you're meeting the control or you're not. And it's that simple.
Yep. And can you add a little bit of color around Redspin is a smaller organization in terms of size. Do you think how did you guys stack up against your DIBCAC assessment based on a smaller number of people involved?
Yeah. So first of all, we had Thomas Graham, who was on here earlier, but I think he dropped off. Thomas was an instrumental part of Redspin and getting us through the DIBCAC inspection. He was our CISO, or is our CISO. It was making sure, as Stacy pointed out, everybody, and I think Karen did as well, everybody that was in charge of some type of process had to understand that process. So we sat through, prior to the DIBCAC even coming out, we brought our consultant in, we sat with them, went over all our policies, all of our procedures. If our procedures weren't reflected properly in the policy, we had to adjust the policies. I think we made at least 15 different amendments to the policies just to get the procedures accurate. That's not even counting the SSP, which was the longest document that took us to put together. It was very painful. But once we got through that, and with the help of that consultant, we went right through the DIBCAC to where, portions of it, they were asking us questions and saying, hey, that's a good idea. And they would take notes down, right? And I'm sure it was the same with Stacy and Karen, right? So it's not like they're inhuman. It's just, kind of when you step back and look at it from a small business perspective, you think, oh my gosh, this thing is just gigantic. How are we going to accomplish this? It's crazy. All it takes is time. It takes time and effort to build all those documents. And that is where the bulk of the certification is going to rely on.
Excellent.
Hopefully I answered that question, right?
No, thanks. Great comments from all. Let's turn the corner now and talk about the future a little bit. So let's presume we've gone through a successful assessment. We're good to go. What do you guys have to think about? How do I maintain these programs, and how do I stay compliant in the longer term? What does that look like, and what can I expect as a company in the DIB?
That's a great question.
Anyone go first? Yeah.
Okay, I'll jump first. So, so what I am recommending to a lot of our clients, and those that are not our clients yet, they're just looking at us. They're also looking at Stacy's organization, so they're kind of shopping, if you will. And this question always comes up, so it's a great question, Greg. And so what I tell them is, if you can't hire somebody to be your CMMC person, then look internally. And then what you need to do is take one of those folks internally and send them to a CCP course. And that is the Certified CMMC Professional. They will get it's more than what the registered practitioners got. They get a full-blown, in-depth, how to do everything CMMC. And then what they will be able to do with that knowledge is maintain the maturity. Once the assessment is done, you've got 3 years, and then you've got to go through all of this again. So they will be able to maintain that maturity throughout those 3 years for the organization.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the important thing is we're a cyber organization, Cask, and we have a lot of cyber folks that have been doing DoD assessments for over 20 years. So we've been doing this, but looking inward, right? Looking at ourselves, making sure that we're continually monitoring. We have, our CISO, we have all of our folks that maintain our security posture on an hourly, daily basis, updating documentation. We update all of our documentation as soon as anything changes. So when that 3-year mark comes, we're ready. We're like, okay, here we go. Here we go again. So making sure you're doing those things daily. There's daily, weekly, monthly, yearly things you have to do to be compliant. It's not just get certified or authorized and forget it. You need an annual security review. These are NIST. This is nothing new. This is nothing new. It's law, and it's been there for over 5 years. So you need to make sure you're secure. What good is it if they walk away, you get your certification, and then you get hacked? Well, we forgot. We took down our VPN, or we just made it all the same password. You can't. You have to be diligent if you truly want to secure the DIB. Protect your company, protect the reputation, and protect all of us out here that are doing this. So that's the important thing. It's not a drill. It's real life. So
I would add on Stacy's point with respect to the change control is that the last thing you want to do is not comply with the policy that you just established for security impact analysis. So every change that you do within your information system, you need to look at it to see if you just suddenly became non-compliant. So that's one of the controls in the framework, and that's a big one to ensure that you're not inadvertently installing a new service or a software that's going to both alter your boundary and make you non-compliant. That's part of, that needs to be built into your change control process to make sure you don't do that. Or if you do that, you've done a sufficient security impact analysis to determine if you're still compliant. So working that into the change control process to make sure your technical settings are not being altered for an outside business process is going to be important for a lot of folks.
Right. And there's plenty of small business, medium business folks that can get help, right? You can get a virtual CISO for, a few hours a month to make sure you're doing that properly. There's a lot of things you can do that you don't really have to pull on a full-time person if you can't afford it. So there's different options out there for sure.
Yeah. And yet, you know, Greg, you got a lot of questions that are popping in down here for the question and answer session.
I just looked at those. There's lots.
There's a lot of great questions, but unfortunately, we're probably not going to get a chance to get to all those. So maybe some kind of follow up to address a lot of your questions. But
there seems to be a lot related to CUI, and I might be able to answer some of them. I think that this is the #1 concern we have from our clients. Like I've gone, this was for 171, but I've gone to, you know, we signed a statement of work for folks to do an analysis on their security controls. And when we got there, they're like, tell us where our CUI is. You know, that's really challenging. And I think that the vagueness of this framework with the, you know, the caveat that anything could be CUI that's a consistent challenge I've seen throughout this. And I think one of the approaches that we're taking with respect to our process is to say there's 3 possible ways you could be notified that there's CUI. One would be, the best way would be through the contract. The contract explicitly says this is a CUI, this is how it should be marked. So that's the best way. And so I would advise everyone to go through their contracts, every existing contract and every prior contract that they have, figure out if there was any designation for CUI and learn where that lives. And then there's also the, hey, by the way, especially like we do assessments, we frequently get told, oh, by the way, this is CUI. So there's the method of being told in, you know, outside of channels or contracts that something CUI needs to be marked as such. So we have a process where you need to escalate that, and then we log that we have that CUI in that particular contract, and we decide what markings to apply to it if necessary. And then what was the third one? I think the third one is just getting it. You know, you get something that says CUI and you're like, now we have CUI, what do we do? And the end process is the same. We need to notify, in our case, our FSO, that we've gotten, we have CUI, it's in this contract, it lives in this place, and then we log it and we have a registry, all of it. So, I mean, I think the tough question, we are kind of assuming that anything that we do could be considered to be CUI at this point. And so what we're doing is ensuring that all the files that we have that are associated with our work are in a CUI compliant, CMMC compliant environment, and are, you know, getting all the requisite controls over it. But that one's a tough one, and it's not easy to figure out. It took us a while to figure out where our older CUI lives. Some of it's marked as FOUO. So that's kind of, I mean, I think that's we could help you with that, but I think that's a good example of something you can do in-house with the resources you have. So figure out where everything lives, figure out what you're going to do if you get told you have it, and just assume that that your boundary could have CUI in it at any, you know, on any of the components within it.
So a couple of other questions I see. One is, how do you know what CMC level you need? You know,
that's that a couple of times. Yep.
Yeah, that's based on the contract you're going for. It usually states right in the contract that you must be CMC level 1 compliant or 3. Obviously, there are a lot more CMMC level 1 contracts out there, but there are some CMC level 3. And then into the second part of that question, which I think Kelly Hall, I'm sorry, asked, is, you know, based off the size of the company, how much is it going to cost us? You know, are we as C3PAOs leveraging costs based off the size of the company? And the answer is yes. So if you're a small organization that has an enclave of 2 servers that's in the cloud, right, and you've got 10 people that utilize the CUI data environment, it's going to be a lot less expensive than somebody that does all DoD contracts where an entire data center is their CUI enclave. Well, the scoping of that is much bigger than a smaller company. So the short answer is yes, there is adjustments for the size of your company.
How about commenting on, like, how do I know, like you say it's in the contract, are there specific things I should be looking for? Terminology, specific clauses, like how do I know if 7012 is in there? Things like that. Is that
the 7012 in the contract references is a good place to start. I was told for 800-171 when that project launched that the designation for CUI should be submitted on a DD-254, which I've never really seen anybody do. You know, so but the DD-254, if you're doing consulting with the government, if you get a DD-254, that's a great place to start looking to see if they've made any CUI designations. But the specific language in the contract, I mean, I think we see contracts on DoD are struggling to implement this program as much as everybody else. So I think that it's not likely that you're going to have a very clear indication as to what is CUI or what may not be CUI. So, but I would start by reviewing the contracts. And if you are able to ask any of your contracting officers, do they, you know, can we get confirmation that there's no CUI on this project? You know, that might be a start, but it's a bit of a challenge. I think that this is something that as the program matures will become a little bit more clear for folks. I think there'll most likely be a more clear way to indicate to a vendor that they are indeed handling CUI. I anticipate that, you know, evolution, but for now, I think contracts officers, especially with older contracts, that's not going to be in there. They weren't thinking about CMMC or, you know, for some of the older ones, even 800-171. So, we're just assuming that we have it. We're making sure that we put it where, you know, where we're implementing all the security controls.
Yeah. So another big, I guess, going back to the confusion and kind of things that are going on is there's a lot of organizations, including some of the folks here, that have subcontractors that are overseas. Right. So Redspin, you know, I'm not sure about Stacy and her team, but we meet weekly with the CMMC AB, and you know, we discuss these kinds of things. So for everybody's edification, right now, if you have a subcontractor overseas, they have to be CMMC compliant as well. So they must get the certification. However, the Department of Defense is not going to recognize it until there is some kind of memorandum of agreement or understanding between our country and theirs by the Department of Defense. Once that MOU or MOA is signed, then they will recognize that the certification is complete. So that was a big question that a lot of us were getting, because we ourselves are dealing with some clients that are overseas. Great.
Yeah, that brings up another interesting question. I know there's a lot of it's kind of a lot of questions about where, you know, where do I go, what do I do kind of questions, I would say, if I had to summarize what a lot of what we're seeing in the thread. So it'd be great if you guys could give us some insights on resources. I know we talked a little bit about consultants as a good resource. We talked a little bit about courses that are offered through the AB. Maybe like just share your own opinions around, like, what should people be doing to educate themselves? Like, where do you go? Where do you learn?
I mean, I think forums like this are a great example of where you can come and ask questions and hopefully get some answers from some subject matter experts. There's a lot out there. There's a lot, you know, people are putting out white papers and you know, there's definitely information out there. If you're in the market to learn about CMMC, there's a lot of information out there. I love the suggestion of going through getting accredited. You know, that's a really good way. If you don't have the budget to do a lot of consulting, go ahead and get somebody accredited so they understand the control requirements. But overall, I think, you know, it's eventually we're going to see the process evolve a little bit. I think I know a number of the C3PAOs are scratching their heads over some of the control interpretations themselves. You know, I think that is kind of typical. It happened with ANR 171 where people didn't understand the requirements. So I think that initial uncertainty will eventually level out a little bit. You know, there'll become more of an industry understanding as to what a control interpretation is. But you know, for now, it's just, you know, find those subject matter experts and see if you can get any information you can from them that might help you answer your questions. You know, we're happy to help.
Yeah, I would say definitely reach out to any of the authorized or candidate C3PAOs. They have the trained personnel. I field questions every day. I help folks every day that can't afford to get an assessment or gap. I just point them in the right way. Hey, here's a NIST SSP template. Here's where it is. Here's this. Here's that. I mean, we have it at our fingertips, but some folks don't, especially if they don't have cyber folks on their program. So reach out. Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing is, you know, if they go out to our Redspin website, we have podcasts where Thomas Graham and some of the other team members have talked about how we got through the DIBCAC and things that they can do to help prepare for an assessment. So those are free. We have white papers, and you ladies pointed it out. There's a lot of folks that are putting a lot of information out there about CMMC, and you have to really be careful because there's a lot of false information
Yes.
out
There
there.
is.
Yes,
so-
exactly, Robert. Yeah.
Right. And so the C3PAOs and the candidate C3PAOs are getting all of the information directly from the CMMC AB. There's no making up our own interpretation of anything. So the white papers you get off of Redspin, the podcasts, all of it. And, I'm sure the other C3PAOs have the same. It's all free. Go look at it, and then launch yourself into 800-171 with NIST.
Mm-hmm.
Start digging into that. That is so close to if you can do the NIST 800-171, you will definitely pass the CMMC level 1 easily. Because I think Stacy pointed it out. That is definitely prepping you for a level 3.
Mhm.
So if you can get through that and understand that, then you're on your way. The other part is that documentation. You got to really get started on it now.
Mhm.
Yeah, we have a few minutes left, and that's a great closing comment, Robert. From Karen and Stacy, other parting comments before we have to wrap.
I'll just look through the questions to see if I could answer any.
Yeah, just reach out, look at our website. My name's on there. Go to the marketplace, right? All of our emails are on there.
Yep.
CMMCAB marketplace, and reach out. We're here to help. Yeah.
Yes. I echo
Greg,
that.
this is Orly. I'll just jump in with one question I'm seeing in the Q&A, and that's about cost. Pardon me if that's already been addressed, but it seemed like it's a huge issue. So I'll just repeat it for the benefit of many of the people here. How much should an SMB budget for consulting, CMMC consulting in preparation for looking for level 1 and level 3?
So like I said, reach out. I've been doing proposals for a year and a half. I give free proposals with ROMs based on the size, scope, and complexity of your organization, and then you can find that out easily. But we need that information first before we can give any cost data.
And that's the hard part, right? Because we don't know what your environment looks like. So it's hard to scope a price to it. If you contact us, it's like Stacy said, it's free. It don't cost you anything to talk to us, and it don't cost you anything to get a proposal for work at all. But it ranges, and just to give you ballparks, it ranges. We have a small client that we're working with that they spent $4,000, and that's for an entire year worth of consulting. Up to 150 hours. It goes all the way up, to in the hundred thousands. It depends on where you are, what you have in place, and the size of the CUI environment.
And, especially for physical and environmental, from a consulting perspective, we'll take your word that you have the controls in place. But for, that's another example in the audit. If we have to travel to a bunch of different locations to do the assessment, that's going to drive up the cost. But I totally agree in that the complexity of the environment is a big factor in determining the price, and also your current maturity. If we're helping someone understand the requirements from jump, and then walking, sometimes we've worked with organizations who actually don't really know what they have implemented just because it's been there for a while. So getting the answers can be a challenge sometimes. And that's really, that's where when we do, initial conversations with you, we'll try to figure out what are your needs and how can we best help you? And then we try to figure it out with the lowest cost to you to get you to what you need.
That's a great point, because we just had a client that was looking at doing their entire environment as a CUI enclave. And after talking with them, I was like, why are you doing the entire environment? You only deal with a portion of the DoD. So really you need to scope that area down and get it smaller, because that's going to bring the cost down of consulting and everything else. So the smaller you can get that environment and contain that, the better off you are.
Yeah.
Fantastic. All right, I know we're at the end of our time. I just want to say thanks again to our panelists. I really appreciate the passion and the insight and great information. It was a lot of fun to do this with you folks, and I hope we can do it again sometime. And I will hand off to Orly, who will take us from here.